Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving into a topic today that is absolutely fundamental if you rely on medical evidence, whether you're a doctor, a researcher, or someone just trying to understand health claims. Randomized clinical trials, RCTs, right? They're widely seen as the gold standard when we want to know if a treatment actually works.
That's exactly right. RCTs are designed very specifically to minimize bias, give us the most reliable answers we can get. They really form the bedrock of evidence-based medicine. They're crucial.
But here's the challenge, and we seem to be seeing more of it: concerns about research integrity popping up after these studies have already been published. And we're not talking minor typos here. We mean serious stuff like data falsification or even outright fabrication.
Sure.
Problems that the initial peer review process doesn't always catch them.
No, it doesn't. And the consequences, well, it's profound. When you start casting doubt on published research, especially the gold standard kind, it erodes trust. Trust in the whole scientific process, which is incredibly dangerous, particularly in medicine.
Exactly. And it turns out, while the problem is increasingly recognized, there's this surprising lack of clear, standardized guidance on what you actually do when these integrity concerns pop up post-publication. How do journals handle it? Institutions, researchers. It often seems quite murky.
And this is precisely the landscape that the source for our deep dive today explores. It's a comprehensive scoping systematic review published in the International Journal of Gynecology and Obstetrics just this year, 2024.
A scoping review.
Yeah.
So that's about mapping out what's already known, right?
Right.
Finding the gaps.
Exactly. The goal is to map the existing literature on a topic, see what the key concepts are, where the gaps in knowledge lie, what kind of evidence is even out there.
Perfect. So that's our mission today. Really map this out with you. We're going to dig into what the literature, according to this review, actually tells us about these post-publication integrity concerns in RCTs. We'll look at the different facets of the problem and critically try to pinpoint those major areas where, well, information and guidance are just missing.
And I think as we dive in, you'll see that while the problem is definitely known, the solutions, the actual roadmap for dealing with it, it's surprisingly incomplete.
Okay, let's get into it then. How do they actually go about mapping this landscape, this review? How do they find out what's already in the literature?
Well, they undertook a really thorough search, cast a very wide net across multiple major databases, PubMed, Scopus, the Cochrane Library, even Google Scholar, and they looked for anything published right up until November 2022.
Okay, the usual suspects for databases.
Right. And importantly, they weren't just looking for traditional research papers. They included editorials, case reports, perspective pieces, even things like blog posts.
So trying to capture the whole conversation around the topic, not just formal studies.
Precisely. To get a complete picture of the discussion, they started with, get this, over 3,000 initial citations.
Wow, 3,000.
Yeah, which shows you how much material is potentially out there touching on this issue, even indirectly. But then they went through a really rigorous multi-step selection process, multiple reviewers checking each article.
Right, that sifting process must be intensive.
Yeah.
Going from 3,000 down to the core stuff, how many articles do they actually end up including in their final analysis?
So after that rigorous process, they narrowed it right down to 89 articles, 89 that specifically addressed post-publication integrity concerns in RCTs.
89. Okay. It really highlights, like you said, how even with thousands of hits, the focus literature might be much smaller.
Exactly.
So what did those 89 articles actually talk about? The review grouped the findings you mentioned into different domains related to the sort of life cycle of an RCT after publication. What were some of those areas?
Yeah, they categorized them. Things like general integrity issues, journal policies on how to handle these problems, guidance for editors and peer reviewers doing their work, how concerns actually get investigated once they're raised, what happens after an investigation, the decisions, sanctions, that kind of thing, and also how integrity is considered when someone's doing a systematic review, pulling together multiple RCTs.
Right, because if the original studies have issues.
Exactly. It compromises the whole synthesis.
Yeah.
And it makes sense that one domain they found quite a bit of literature in was, well, recommendations for future research.
Ah, okay. So people recognize there's a problem and are suggesting where to go next.
Precisely. That area, recommendations for future research, was actually the domain covered by the largest percentage of the articles they found, about 29%.
But here's where, this really jumped out at me, and it's quite concerning. There was one crucial domain related to post-publication integrity where this massive, extensive review found nothing. 0 articles.
This is the really significant gap that just leaps out from their findings. There was no literature identified that provides critical appraisal guidance specifically for post-publication integrity issues.
Wait, so 0 articles telling you how to critically evaluate a published RCT if a question is raised about its integrity after it's already out there? Like, how do you assess its trustworthiness or lack thereof once it's published and someone flags a potential problem?
That's exactly right. We have literature talking about general integrity, talking about policies, talking about investigations, but basically nothing guiding someone on the practical steps. How do I appraise this study now, given this new concern? It's a major blind spot.
Wow. Okay, so stepping back from those individual domains for a second, what were the big overarching themes, the key findings that emerged from those 89 articles overall? What's the picture this review paints of the field right now?
Well, the review synthesized several critical points that kept coming up. First, there's a really strong consensus on the urgent need for clear policies on post-publication research integrity. And importantly, that these policies need to involve all the key players, the journals publishing the work, the institutions where the research happened, and the funders who paid for it.
Right, can't just be left to the journal editor alone to figure it all out.
Exactly. And connected to that, a massive theme was the urgent need for much greater transparency in publications.
Transparency. Okay, what does that mean in practice?
It means actively promoting practices like publishing study protocols before the study starts a priori registration, making statistical analysis plans public ahead of time, outlining exactly how the data will be analyzed, and, crucially, encouraging data sharing, making the actual data available.
So making the whole process more open from the very beginning right through to the end.
Yes. The review also really highlighted that investigation reports, when an issue is investigated, those reports and their findings, along with things like retraction notices or expressions of concern, they need to be published in full, openly. Right now, they found the situation often lacks, firm policies and real rigor in how these investigations are conducted and then reported back.
So transparency isn't just about the initial study data, it's also about the process and outcome when a problem is flagged. The investigation itself should be public.
Correct. Other themes that emerged included the need for journals to significantly improve the quality of their instructions to authors regarding integrity, making expectations clearer up front.
Makes sense.
And encouraging practices like preprints and open peer review were also mentioned as potential ways to help catch issues earlier or maybe increase accountability.
Preprints. That's posting the paper online before the formal peer review, right?
Right. And open peer review is where the reviewer comments, maybe even the reviewer's names, are made public alongside the published paper.
Okay. More eyes on it, potentially.
Potentially. The review also pointed out a really critical technical need. The statistical methods that are currently used to try and detect scientific misconduct, they need to be scientifically validated.
Whoa, hang on. So the tools people might be using right now to spot, say, faked data, we don't actually have solid proof that those tools work reliably.
That's a major point they raised. How much confidence can we have in current detection efforts if the methods themselves haven't been properly validated?
That's a big one.
Exactly. And tied to all of this, they found a clear need for more training. Training for the researchers who are doing the work and publishing it, and also for the biomedical editors at the journals who are handling it. Overall, there's just this pressing call for developing completely novel and, frankly, more effective methods to detect scientific misconduct in the first place.
Okay, so taking all these themes together, the need for policies, transparency, better investigations, validated tools, training, what are the big implications? What did the review's authors say this all means?
Well, the overarching implication is pretty clear. If we want to maintain confidence in the quality of RCTs, we need serious, focused research to fill these gaps that they've identified. And they emphasized again that improving transparency isn't just one group's job. It requires action from all stakeholders.
And journals specifically, they have a big role to play here.
Absolutely. The review stresses that journals need better instructions for authors on integrity. They need much clearer procedures for what happens when concerns are raised, how are they investigated, and they need more transparent reporting of both the investigation findings and any sanctions that are applied. Plus, the reasons for actions like retractions or expressions of concern need to be clearly stated publicly.
Which seems particularly important because, as the review noted, sometimes retracted articles still get cited. Right. People keep referencing them even after they've been pulled.
That's a real concern they touched on, yeah, the continued citation of retracted work. They also highlighted the very practical difficulties researchers and others face sometimes when they try to get access to the raw data from the original authors, or even just getting satisfactory investigations from the institutions involved. It can be a real barrier to verifying or challenging findings.
Making it incredibly hard to check things if you can't get the data or see a transparent investigation report.
Precisely. And this just reinforces that strong call coming from the literature for pushing open science standards and data sharing. It's seen as a really crucial way forward to tackle these integrity issues.
And looping back to that point about detection methods, the fact that current guidance or screening tools for data integrity haven't been scientifically validated, that's flagged as a really serious concern, isn't it?
It really is, especially when you consider the potential impact. An allegation of misconduct, even if it turns out to be unfounded later, can have absolutely devastating consequences for a researcher's career and reputation.
Yeah, it's incredibly high stakes.
Absolutely. So this idea of sharing those a priori protocols, the statistical analysis plans, the anonymized raw data, it's seen as key to achieving the necessary transparency, not just for evaluating individual studies, but also for ensuring the integrity of systematic reviews that depend on those studies.
You know, what's fascinating here is how this deep dive, guided by this scoping review, paints this picture. It shows us a landscape where the problem of post-publication integrity in RCTs is widely acknowledged. People know it's an issue. But the actual system for dealing with it, the policies, the procedures, the validated tools, the training, and critically, that guidance on how to evaluate a questionable paper after it's published, that system seems fragmented, incomplete, and in some really key areas just missing.
It absolutely underscores that urgent need, doesn't it, for more transparency, open data, open protocols, open investigation reports, and for all the different players, journals, institutions, funders, researchers themselves to actually come together and build a much more robust, more trustworthy system.
So what does this all really mean for you, the listener? Someone who encounters scientific findings, maybe relies on them every day. Well, it means that even the studies we consider the absolute gold standard, the RCTs you're often told to trust the most, even they face significant challenges related to integrity after they're published. And the system for catching and handling those challenges is, right now, surprisingly undeveloped. It lacks clear, validated procedures in key areas.
Which really raises an important question for you to consider as you navigate all the information out there. If even the gold standard of research faces these kinds of post-publication integrity gaps and lacks clear procedures for properly addressing them, what does that imply about the level of critical thinking, the scrutiny we should probably apply to any scientific finding we encounter, regardless of its initial prestige or where it's published?
A lot to think about indeed. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.